Well, we got a treat tonight. We had him last year for a program, but this guy is, I've known for a really long time when he basically first got started. And he runs a first-class operation. I'm dragging a few club members to two of his events, upcoming events this summer. And I think we'll have serious converts, but take a look at what Kyle has to offer. He runs great programs. He has very interesting formats for his trips. He's a very knowledgeable guide. He has great people that work for him. The full service trips are off the hook. The food is to die for, and the service is top notch. He's fun to hang around with, and very knowledgeable fisherman, just an all around good guy. So you got a treat for us, little off the beaten path this time. We're going to talk about saltwater tonight, huh?
For sure, yeah.
Okay, well, it's all yours, buddy. You're up.
All right. Well, yeah, I appreciate the introduction, Mark, as always. Yeah, I thought we'd talk about something a little different than smallmouth bass and pike and muskie and trout, which is my normal topics. But I have been doing a bit of traveling around over the past number of years here, fishing for stuff in the saltwater and some stuff down in South America. So I thought I'd kind of change up the topic a little bit on something that was just kind of fresh. We just got back from a tarpon trip and thought it'd be fun to share with you guys something a little different. Yeah, I'll pull I got a little presentation here. I'll pull that up, and then we can tie a couple flies if you want. All right, everyone see that? Should be good.
Looks good.
All right. So yeah, this is my steady team right here. It's myself on the left there, and then Hannah, who's the new kind of command center, as it were. She kind of makes sure everything stays in line and everyone's trips get booked on the right days, and all the good stuff that happens behind the scenes. She's kind of the person you'll talk to if you book a trip with us, and we'll take care of getting you guys on the calendar and that kind of thing. And then Ben, he's the man behind the food, and also he's been kind of with me since the beginning of this. He guides primarily just camps now. He's got some kids that are getting a little older, and he's a little more involved with that. So he doesn't have quite as much time to guide as he used to, but he's out there every chance he can get, and he's a great guy to get to know. And then our newest addition, Wyatt, who's young and full of energy and kind of our trout wizard. But he is now going to be doing some bass trips for me, and he's pretty chomping at the bit to be taking people out in his new boat. So it's been great building a team, and something that started with just myself to now having people to worry about, and also share the joy with. So it's been a fun adventure so far. So some of you guys have fished with me over the course of all this, and I appreciate that, and look forward to seeing you all again. So, but a little bit just about, if you guys haven't aren't super familiar with what Black Earth Angling does, we do classic day trips, so that we do those for trout, smallmouth, toothy critters, and then a number of rough fish that you can find on the Wisconsin River, and that's kind of what makes our day to day. And then we do kind of the multi-day trips, or the annual camps, as it were. Those are some of the ones that Mark will be participating in this year, and I think he's coming up for Driftless Trout Camp. We do that where we historically had done this, if you see in the background picture here, this big wall tent, the canvas mansion. But we have since all gotten a little older and decided that a cabin is going to be a lot better, especially in the month of April when you don't know what the weather's going to do. And it's really nice. It's a real nice place to be, but the cabin we have is wonderful, and it's a super great time. And then we have Crash Camp, which has kind of been our most popular camp, and that one is it's a rustic, or I would say a rustic camp on an island. and that is you'll be staying in like little canvas tents. And that one is kind of like centered around the big crash phenomenon. And that's a real special time to get out and spend some time on the lower Wisconsin River. And then one of the newer camps, I think Mark did this one last year, and it will be coming back up again. This one is kind of the similar idea that Crash Camp is, except we have a nice cottage right on the river. So we get to fish the morning, and we come back for a midday siesta. You can take a nap, you can hang out, have a drink, whatever you like to do. And then we go back out for an evening session. And it kind of runs like that. You show up in the evening, fish, we have nice dinner, things like that. The next day you'll fish a morning session, come back, have lunch, again, have a siesta, and then go back out for the evening session. So the idea here is that we're kind of like, we're getting you there in the most efficient way to hit the best windows of your time there. And then, getting to sit around and share drinks and some laughs when, you don't necessarily need to be out on the water. So that's kind of the best of both worlds there. And then we also do a toothy camp in the fall. Last year, because the weather was stayed so mild, it ended up being just another really awesome smallmouth camp with the bonus of some extra pike and muskie around. But the bass were super, super active all the way into October this past year with the milder temps. And so that was kind of a good surprise for folks, kept things interesting. And then we do custom camps. So basically any of these you see, we can kind of like replicate as long as you have a group of 4 or more, and that our schedule, it will align with that. And then lastly, some destination fishing. I've been kind of doing more and more of this in the last couple of years, obviously post-pandemic here, or at least what seems to maybe be a little bit of that. Things are opening back up and we're able to travel again. And I've been kind of chomping at the bit to go do some travel fishing. And so we set up a couple of trips. We did the Tarpon trip to Campeche, Mexico, which is the one we just got back with. And I'll be talking about that one. And then let's see, I'll be in Turks and Caicos for some bone fishing coming up in the end of March here. And then in October, we're going and doing some red fishing in Louisiana. So if any of those things interest you, or you're looking to go somewhere and try something new, certainly reach out to me. Whether it's an idea of a place you want to go to, or if you're interested in any of the trips that I have coming up, I'm happy to help get you out there. So, but let's get on to the tarpon. So I don't know how many of you are familiar. I'm just going to make the assumption that this is new for everybody. So I apologize if you fish for them a bunch and you know a lot about them. But I'll keep it kind of general to no knowledge about them at all. So basically the difference here between the juvenile and the adults is they're not as big, obviously, right? They're, usually range between 5 and 30 pounds is where you're going to find most of them. And they don't migrate yet. So they're in an estuary system. They live there year round. They're not making the big journey that the adults do. When they get large enough, they join that, and then they get into the migration. Their diet is pretty simple. I mean, they kind of they're opportunistic eaters. They eat what's around, what can be found in the mangroves. And that's basically where you're going to find them, is places that have extensive mangrove systems. That's you're going to be fishing kind of different, mangrove channels and lagoons, that type of thing. That's where most of them are going to be found. So I'm going to talk kind of specifically about Yucatan tarpon. I fished for them in a number of different places in the Yucatan. Probably the most places I fished is actually in Cancun. There's a lagoon right there that actually has some pretty solid baby tarpon fishing. And then kind of our most recent travels have been to Campeche, which is, I don't know if you guys can see it right there. It's just south of the tip of the Yucatan. It's about due south of Baton Rouge. Is actually, if you were to draw a line and line it up with the U.S. So it's on the northern side of the Yucatan Peninsula. So it's not your classic Caribbean looking landscape. It's more mangroves and, kind of rocky shoreline. Whereas if you go to the south or the south, or kind of, I guess you would call it the east side of the Yucatan Peninsula, that's where you're going to find Ascension Bay and a lot of the places where you're going to go to get, permit bonefish, that type of thing. There is some baby tarpon over there as well. But this little area here is primarily a baby tarpon fishery. So a couple of the places, there's Campeche, and if you go a little further west, you see Tabasco, and you can kind of see that little bay that's there. Those are some of the really, really great places for them. Campeche basically has the second largest mangrove system in the world, right there, and you can be in it pretty quickly, which is kind of just gives you endless amounts of places to fish for them. Which is a great place to go target them, and they're there year round, which is kind of the great thing. You can kind of fish anytime you want, and you're gonna find them. So let's kind of break it down a little bit. Most of the gear you're going to be using is 7 and 9, or sorry, like a 7 through 9 weight. In most places, you're going to want like an 8 or 9. A 7 tends to be a little on the light side, especially if you get any sort of breeze. And it's actually pretty simple as far as like your gear setup and what's required. A nice, probably a faster action rod with a weight forward floating line. I actually, the bass line I use here, I used it just to see if it would work. It works just fine. It casts well, casts the tarpon flies well, and loads the rod nicely. And especially if people are comfortable casting it, you can take a lot of what you use here for, smallmouth, and then just take it there for tarpon. Obviously, if you want to get a new line, there's some great saltwater lines out there. We don't need to go too technical into which lines, but weight forward line, floating lines is what you're going to use most of the time there. And that's, other than a fly box with a few flies, and we'll get into that here in the next slide. You don't really need a whole lot of other gear. It's nice in that sense. You kind of just show up, get your box of flies and your rod, and that's really about it. A spool of some fluorocarbon usually for a bite guard, but most of the time the guide will have that in the boat, so something you don't necessarily need to bring. So it's fairly light on the gear front. But the flies, from my experience, and I fished again a number of different locations, it seems that if you put the fly in the right spot out in front of them, most of the time, if they see it, they're coming for it. And you may have to switch more, not necessarily the pattern, but maybe like what the pattern is. If it's a top water, they might reject it, and then you just switch to something just below the surface, and that does the trick. Or maybe that fly that you have under the surface, your subsurface fly, is sinking a little too fast, or not fast enough, or not getting down enough. So it's just a matter of changing the weights. But for the most part, I found that these fish are super aggressive for the most part on just about anything you throw at them, which again is lends itself really well to going and having a good time getting out of the winter. So most of the flies are tied a little bit different, and I'll tie two kind of my favorite ones here later, but these are just kind of like my 3 favorites that I like to have with me. The one on the left here with the chartreuse head, it's similar to a fly or a pattern called the Fishalicious or the Megalopsical. They both look very similar. I'm not sure which one is which, to be honest. They're about the same exact pattern. This got a little bit of a deer hair head and mono eyes. Again, nice stout hook. And then in the middle there, we have the Gurgler. This is a little different than the one I tie, but the idea here is that you need something that just kind of makes a little surface commotion. I found that something that pops really loudly isn't that effective. You want something that more like sprays water or slides. There's a number of slider patterns that can be really popular, but I find that the Gurgler is a great one because it's a relatively easy tie. You can when you're done fishing tarpon, you can take it and put it in your bass box, and it works great there too. I usually try to have flies that I can repurpose when I'm done fishing. And then the one on the far right is probably the one of the most popular that's used for tarpon, and that's a tarpon toad. And that one's, again, it's kind of an interesting looking fly. The idea there is that, number one, tracks relatively straight, and it doesn't sink too quickly. Most of these subsurface flies are tied with like a mono eye, not a bead chain. Again, they don't seem to like things that fall real quickly, or that dart like really hard side to side. And I think mainly the reason a lot of people like a straighter swimming fly is that the fish a lot of times will come up and swipe at it, and you think with that big mouth they'd hit it every time, but I don't know if it's just the water displacement or what, but they'll miss it a number of times. So they'll swipe and miss, and if it's kind of dodging and diving, a lot of times it seems like the fish has got a hard time picking up where it is again. Which seems, I mean, they got these big eyes and a huge mouth. You're kind of like, why on earth wouldn't they be able to find it? But it just seems that something that tracks nice and straight and doesn't sink real fast is really, really kind of the key. And so what I'll do is when I'm building my box, I'll just kind of stick with basically these 3 patterns for the most part. And, you can experiment a little bit, but I'll have these and I'll tie them in just kind of an array of colors, ranging from bright and light to down to dark and, black and purples, and then if you have obviously different light conditions, if it's cloudy and whatnot, those patterns are going to be, better to use on certain days and things like that. So it is nice to, again, have just kind of an array of color of them where, you can, if something's not working, you're able to switch and make a move, or if the conditions are cloudy or bright, you have some options. But we'll talk about kind of the game in itself a little bit. So basically, it's not rocket science fishing. It can be technical, but for the most part, I find it, from what we do here for, let's say, smallmouth or, pike and muskie, it's pretty straightforward fishing. And I would say you can relate it probably to doing a float trip for bass around here, where you're kind of casting the structure and your guide is kind of responsible for moving you along. So your guide will be usually on a poling platform or on the back of the boat using a pole. Sometimes they stand up there, sometimes they don't. I'm not sure why they do one or the other. But usually they're just going to kind of cruise you along the edge of these massive mangrove systems, and you're just going to kind of cast it as close as you can. And sometimes, when a lot of times you're going to fish early in the morning. So you start at kind of sunrise, or you leave the dock at about dark, and you get out there and start fishing as the sun's coming up. And that seems to be the time that they're most active. And in the morning, you can't really see in the water all that well. So you do a little bit more blind casting and looking for fish rolling. And when they're rolling, they're usually rolling in a school, and you'll kind of see that top, like classic tarpon looking fin come up out of the water, and they kind of porpoise. And you sometimes see, you see like a dozen of them at a time. It's really, get your heart pumping and make you really get your fly line tangled up in your feet. But the game is basically, again, you're going to be cruising along looking for that, and your guide's obviously going to help you. But in the morning, he can't see in the water either. So it's kind of like cover water, cast close to the mangroves, and then wait for a big tug. In the morning, I really like to fish the top water, especially because it's usually a little calmer in the morning. And so I'll fish a gurgler, and there's no mistaking when they find it and they try to eat it. It's quite an explosion, and usually scares you the first time. But another thing you'll do is, the nice thing about a lot of these systems is that they're usually pretty extensive. The mangroves are. And so let's say the wind kicks up or something like that, they can take you back into these, like, basically these mangrove little rivers that go snake way back in there. And sometimes you got to get down and duck in the boat to get through certain spots. And then all of a sudden you come out to these little lagoons way back in the mangroves. And a lot of times they're just like littered full of fish. And once the sun gets high enough, the water is generally clear and you can kind of sight fish. So you'll see like pods of them kind of cruising around. And again, if you're not real versed in sight fishing, you'll have a guide there to help you out, to spot fish, which is super helpful, especially if you haven't done a lot of it. But a lot of times it's pretty obvious, and you're not making super long casts most of the times. I would say, under 50 feet is very reasonable, and most of the time it's probably around the 30-foot mark is where you're casting to these fish. So you can, maybe you might see them coming, and you can, they're kind of cruising the edges of the mangroves. You can kind of wait until they get within casting distance and then fire a shot at them. So it can be quite an exciting thing. And again, it's something that you guys have all done before. If you fish for, if you've done any sort of float fishing, it's similar. I mean, there's no current, but the guy's pulling you along nicely, and it's an exciting way to fish. Yeah, and here's kind of a picture of some of the mangrove channels you may go back into. So it's kind of tight, but all of a sudden it'll open up into this little magical lagoon filled with tarpon. So, and as you're working your way through the day, and you're casting tight into those mangroves, if you're good at getting really close in, and getting your fly right tight in there, you can, a lot of times you'll pull some snook out of there, or run into some barracuda. They like to hang in those mangroves quite a bit. And we've run into some really nice snook while doing that, kind of just blind casting along. So, the beauty of this is that, kind of despite what the sky is doing, whether it's cloudy or sunny, you can still have a really good chance at fish. For example, when you go bone fishing or something for permit and you're out on the flats and it's like 100% sight fishing game and there's no edges or nothing to relate to, if you get a week full of clouds, it could be pretty tough fishing, where this is a little different in that sense, in that you have a real good chance of catching fish just blind casting. So it's kind of one of the great advantages of doing this, and also, getting some saltwater fishing in. And again, this is kind of like what it looks like in some of these little mangrove channels. It can be tight casting and really challenging. So you got to kind of like look around and make sure you got a little casting lane. And sometimes you're roll casting at them. And a lot of times you'll see them and and then you hook into one of these things and one of these little things, and they're jumping up in the mangroves and they're up on the shore and then they're back in the water. And it's kind of mayhem once you hook into one in these little things, which is my favorite place to fish for them, because it is just so kind of combat fishing. And and not many people get to roll cast to rolling tarpon very often, so it's kind of a neat thing. And honestly, some of these mangrove systems are so old and extensive. They're more like forests than they are kind of what you would experience in some places where you've seen mangroves before. These things are been here a long time, and they're actually they're forests. And you also get out there, especially in the morning and in days where you have calmer conditions, where you can see out in the open water. You can see that there's a mangrove there, mangrove edge there, but sometimes they'll be rolling a little further off the bank. And that's usually when you get into some of the larger ones. We've seen tarpon that were definitely in the 30-pound range, and got to cast at them and hook into them. The bigger ones can quickly send things awry for you if you're not ready for it. The big ones are good at getting off, but they're certainly there and super exciting to get after. But yeah, a few keys to success that I've found while doing this. First and foremost, listen to your guide. That's probably something that you can say for most guided trips, but a lot of these guys don't say a whole lot, and I would kind of I don't know if I want to warn you or just kind of inform you that a lot of times once you leave the United States, the guiding's just a little bit different. Like, I don't think there's as much, I would say, hand holding or communication a lot of times. They're there to put you where the fish are and not necessarily teach you how to cast or teach you to do these things. You're kind of expected to, kind of be ready to cast for when they get you in the position. And in my experience in Mexico, all the guides I've had have been super, super wonderful as far as, boat positioning, finding the fish. They've been some of the best, especially in the boat positioning department. They really know how to move those boats around nicely. But a lot of them aren't English speaking. They know basically like fishing English, so they know kind of words. And so you either do a lot of sign language if you have, more intense questions than those regarding fishing. But after you're fishing for an hour, you kind of get to feel each other out. But I think it's important to ask questions. Usually when I get in the boat, I won't tie a fly on her. If I do, it doesn't matter. Like, I open my box up, hand it to my guide and tell them, like what fly, and they'll pick something out that they like, and I put that one on. And then throughout the day, if you're having maybe some slow fishing, again, because some of these guys can be pretty quiet until they see fish. But once in a while, if I think that I might need to switch a fly, I'll just swing the fly over and, ask him, say, hey, still good? And he'll either say, no, change it, or yeah, keep fishing with that. So there's a couple of tricks there for, fishing with maybe non-English speaking guides. Most of the time, you all speak the same fishing language and you may not know it. And that part of it's pretty fun when someone gets a fish on, or the fish does something amazing. Like, everyone on the boat is laughing and having a good time. And I think you build rapport pretty quickly with these guys, even though you can't speak the same language. So one of the things I've really, really keyed in on the last few times I was there is focusing on the cuts, the coves, and like the bays. So you'll be going along think of it as much of like a weed line if you're a gear fisherman, or fish lakes a lot. Anytime that the mangroves kind of cut away and make a little bit of a cove or a bay, it just seems that the tarpon like to mill around in those areas, because most of the time they're kind of cruising along the edges, just looking for food. But when they get in these bays, they seem to just like twirl around and mill around in these things. And so I've found when we're approaching them, to make sure that I'm not taking a piss and, my line's not wrapped around my feet, or like we're not changing flies, or, when we come to these little areas that you see coming up as a cut or a cove in the mangroves, that seems to be time to be on your game and be ready and focused, because that's where I've had my most consistent hooking up of tarpon is along these coves and bays. So write that one down if you're taking notes. And a lot of times, a nice thing about these little bays is that because you have mangroves on both sides, if you kind of look at this picture, you can see where the reflection or where you can see in the water, and that's along the edges where kind of there's a backdrop of mangroves, and it allows you to see, and cuts the glare and allows you to see into the water. And so a lot of times in these bays and cuts, you can see pretty well into them, even if there is a glare in the water. And just when we go bone fishing, I tell people the same thing, like, look where you can see and kind of focus on those areas. You can still blind cast, but have your eyes in the areas you can see into the water, because all of a sudden you see a shadow go cruising through there, or you see a bunch of fish all of a sudden move through there, and you can pick up and make a presentation to them. And strip sets. This one is is certainly key to keeping these fish buttoned up. They have a real hard mouth. And if you don't get a good strip set on them, most of the time they're going to shake you. So the biggest thing there is, just kind of focus on what you're trying to do. And, if you got to keep repeating it in your head as you're fishing along, then do that. But when they come up and hit that, you just keep that rod tip down and just kind of keep stripping until you feel everything come tight. And then you can lift the rod and fight them. One thing I didn't necessarily put anything in here specifically about it, but with baby tarpon, generally you don't need to use your reel, and I'd probably recommend against it. I think you have a lot better control by using your hand to manage when they run and when to take line. They pull real hard and they're going to take line real fast, but most of the time it's not super long runs where it's going to get you way into your backing, because most of the time they're heading into the mangroves to try to, you know, tangle you up and break you off. So, you know, if you're within casting distance of those mangroves, that's all the farther they're gonna want to go is into those mangroves. But it's a serious battle, and if anyone has fished for tarpon before, you know how much they like to go aerial and jump. It's quite a sight to see, and it'll get you giggling pretty quickly, watching them kind of leap out of the water and do cartwheels, which kind of leads me into my next thing here. It's bow your rod. There's always a classic saying, bow to the king. And it is a real thing. I got to fish with one of my guide buddies who came along on my last trip, who's a real accomplished angler. He had never fished for tarpon before, and he had no problem hooking them, but keeping them on was another thing. And he was starting to get a little frustrated, and I was videoing him, and I had to prove to him that he was not bowing his rod, even though he thought he was. But when those fish go out of the water, you put your rod tip down, and all that does is allow there to be some slack in the line, because when everything's tight and they like to cartwheel, it reverses the hook and out it comes. And they shake with such violence that a lot of times just the shaking, I think, can like just pop it loose, especially if there's tension on that. So a lot of times, like not a lot of times, all the time, when the fish goes up, you bring your rod down until the fish is back in the water, and you come tight again. And that's probably the biggest difference in fishing for tarpon than most other things you fish for, is kind of when they go up, which they will, and probably multiple times. You got to remember to let off a little bit so that you don't pop the hook on them. And lastly, have fun. I mean, it's a super, super fun thing to fish for. It's, again, Hannah and I went down there last February, kind of right when everything opened back up, right when Mexico opened its border back up. I was really itching to get somewhere and go. And this has been on my list of places to go check out for a little while. And we kind of went down there and had some just incredible fishing. You know, like I would say I probably couldn't count how many shots we had in a day. There was quite a few of them. I would say on average we landed about 4 to 5 fish each day. We were out and hooked plenty more. But the nice thing is this is an estuary system, and there's lots of them around, and again, they're around year round, which is super exciting. So that you can go down there in February, March, December, and get away from the cold here for a little bit and have something else to go after. Which is again just an extremely, there's a reason they're like one of the most sought after game fish out there. There's a ton of fun to fish for and catch. And I would say I would put this Campeche trip we were on up there with like just about as perfect of a trip as you could ask for, as far as escaping the winter and going somewhere and getting some fishing in, as well as maybe just some cultural stuff. I'll kind of get into it here. This is the town of Campeche is really interesting because it's Mexico's safest city, and their crime rate's extremely low, and I think largely due to there's a lot of government centers in Campeche, and they pride themselves on their low crime rate. There's in the safeness of their city. We walked everywhere without ever feeling uncomfortable whatsoever. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's got just a super, super rich history that is, goes way back, and it's got a super fun, like there's just a lot of history there that's really kind of fun to learn about, and the people take great pride in it. We go through a company called Campeche Tarpon is kind of our hosts. It's a family-run business, and Alejandro is the owner. He is the one who started it and kind of started the whole. He was the first guy to take a fly rod and start fishing for tarpon in the mangroves around there, and basically converted some commercial fishermen that he knew into fly guides. And he's got most of those guides still working for him. So some of these guys they grew up, they're from Campeche. They've been guiding for 20 plus years for them, so they know their stuff and they know where to find them, which is great. But Alejandro's got a son named Alex, who's low 20s, 21, 22 years old, and he kind of comes along as our tour guide, comes out to dinner with us, and he's just a wealth of knowledge and just a hoot to be around. Again, speaks super good English and is just has a ton of pride for his city. So it's fun to kind of go with him and share stories, and he knows how important the tarpon are, and it's kind of cool supporting such a local like family run operation. But yeah, so you have this beautiful city, and you also have the tarpon there. This is Edzna, one of the famous Mayan ruins that they'll set up a private tour for you guys if you want to, if that's something that the group wants to do. And we went and saw this. I will say, this is kind of leading into our last trip. We did have a little bit of the rough weather. It's the first time he's ever missed out on more than like a day of fishing. We were only able to fish one of the 4 days we were down there. And again, because it is government run, or very, very much government controlled, they have a port authority, which in a lot of places in Mexico, there's no such thing. But the port authority will, if conditions are bad, they will shut the port down. So it's not like it's in their hands. They literally lock the gate, and there's guys with machine guns standing there, not letting you get to the dock. So when that happens, unfortunately, we were kind of shit out of luck. But it was also, again, one of the first times that's ever happened to him. It's a place that generally gets pretty fair weather. You may have a cold front or some weather come in for a day, but most of the time it's pretty fair weathered there. And the biggest thing was that it was a major cold front, which if you kind of follow anyone who's fishing saltwater, Belize was kind of blown out for a long time. And there's this big cold front in the Gulf that kept wanting to come down from the north, which again isn't a normal thing for this area. So we ended up doing a lot more sightseeing than we would have normally. So we got to go see Edzna, which Hannah and I had done previously, and it's an amazing Mayan ruin site, which is something that was worth seeing. The food there is incredible. They have wonderful restaurants in a beautiful downtown. Very historic downtown, kind of cobblestone roads, open air dining on the street. It's a wonderful place to kind of spend an evening. So kind of how it works there is you fish a morning, sun from kind of like dark to about midday, and then as the tide changes, that might get a little bit later each day, but most of the time you're off the water by between 2 and 5 o'clock, I would say. And then the rest of the time is ours to do what we see fit. So usually we'll go back to the place we're staying and relax for a little bit, meet back up for a couple cocktails or something like that, and then go out to eat at one of the restaurants there. And again, this is just some of the city views. It's an incredible city, and the reason I'm mentioning this is that it'd be a shame not to also mention kind of this city along with the wonderful fishery. I mean, I would go back to Campeche tomorrow just to hang out in the city and be there. It's in itself a great place to see. So if you're someone who likes to travel, this is a wonderful place to go see whether or not you're going to fish. And it's nice because you can do 3 days of fishing and 2 days of just having time to tour the city. But again, really wonderful place. And you have to mention how wonderful the city is on top of already great fishery. And if you're stuck there with some bad weather, like what happened to us, which again I don't think is a very common thing from my understanding, you have something to fall back on. You have this wonderful city that's got lots of things to do. that can take up some of the time that would otherwise be taken up by fishing. And I've been at lodges before where you are at the lodge and there's nowhere else to go. And if you get socked in there, it can be a little tiring to be stuck at a place without any place to go and do things. So yeah, just some sights of the city. Yeah, and I'll open it up to some questions here before I tie some flies. If anyone's got any, feel free to shoot them at me here.
What's the best time to go?
I think, they really seem to like October a whole lot. That is, I think, when the tides are most consistent, and it seems like that they just rave about October. October is kind of the month. Again, they'll tell you that, really no time's a bad time to be there. But if you had to choose a time, I think October would probably be the best time to go. I think, again, most consistent fishing, and most consistent weather down there, it seems like. So yeah, October, to answer your question.
But you said anytime, really.
Anytime, really. Yeah. We went down there in February, and it's considered like their low season. So the difference in the off, like I guess what you call the low season, the off season is, which is kind of our winter, is that things are a little bit more tide dependent. And so your time of day when you're fishing may change throughout the week because the tide changes, obviously, each day. In the summer months, I don't think that you get that big tide. I think you can fish kind of the same time of day every day, and the fish are going to be around because I think there's more water around those areas. So that's my understanding anyways. So, but like I said, we were down there in February. This last February, we had some odd weather, but when Hannah and I were there, we had like just absolutely gorgeous weather, sunny, good sight fishing weather, calm, wonderful. So.
Good, thank you.
Yep. Anything else? This is an annual trip that I'll be doing. So if anyone does have some interest in going or putting into group, we can if you guys want to put a group together, we can go down there. It's certainly it's a great thing if you're looking to get out of town in the winter. That's usually when I'll do them, is in my off season here. I'll go down there and it'll be something I annually do. I absolutely love the whole program. I love the people involved, and I love the city a lot. So, and these fish are just about as fun of a thing as you can ask for on a fly rod. So.
And when would that be, Kyle, time of year?
That I would be doing trips? Yeah, I tend to like the month of February. It seems to be a time where winter is really setting in here. I wouldn't mind. I might look into doing one in October, but October is still a little busy for me. But basically those, I think, from my understanding, as long as I can secure the dates early enough, from the interest that I'm getting, I'm probably going to be doing multiple next winter. So I'll probably go down there, whether it be a couple weeks in a row, or if we go down there, one in February, one in March, maybe one in December, that type of thing.
What typically is the itinerary? Can you get a nonstop out of Chicago or no?
So you're going to fly to generally, I believe, Houston, and from Houston, you're going to fly to Merida. And Merida's got the international airport. They pick you up right from there. They put us in a nice vehicle. It's a nice highway. It's a 2-hour drive to Campeche. So that is a little bit of a ride, but once you're there, they drop you right off at your lodging. And then, they pick us up every morning. They the night before, they'll let us know what time they're going to pick us up. Usually the place we stay has got breakfast ready for us in the morning. Go out, fish. They got sandwiches, water, that type of thing on the boat. And then once we get off the water, then it's kind of up to us what we want to do. Like I said, Alex, who kind of acts as your tour guide, he'll come with us if we want to any dinner we want. We've got a couple favorite places. We try to, there are a few like kind of pretty Americanized restaurants down there. But we try to avoid those and go with the more authentic, things that you that, you go down there for. And they haven't let us down yet. So, I mean, the food has just been probably the highlight of the trip. Yeah, it's, again, I can't say enough about it. It's been wonderful, and which is the reason I want to go back again. So.
And what would be a typical length of trip? 4 or 5 days or what?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, usually what did we do this time? We did 4 nights, 5 days.
Okay.
Yep. So usually you get about 4 days of fishing, which I think is plenty. I don't think you really need a lot more than that. It gives you, if you have one, day where maybe it's a little breezy or, some bad, some clouds or something like that, you still have, other days to fish. So, I mean, it basically, like, if you get out there and the weather's decent, like you good chance you're going to have some good fishing. And I think that's the big difference between chasing them, when they're babies in estuary systems versus chasing the adults, where, it's, stakes are a little higher. The guides are probably a little bit more intense in my experience. And if you hook one, it might be a 3-hour ordeal where you're hooked into a fish where, you get these in, yeah, they fought really hard and you're gassed, but you're ready for another one. And you'll likely get a shot at another one. So.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Any difference between, I mean, you said you can bring your bass or your musky stuff with you. Do you need a saltwater fly line, or just a regular floating line will be fine?
I think a regular floating line would be just fine. Like, I obviously I brought some saltwater lines, but I mean, I don't think it's necessary. I know, like, Hannah really likes the setup we use for bass, and she casts it super well. And I brought it just like on a hunch, like maybe like, and like the line setup that I had she's like, I want to try the other one. So she did that and was using just our regular bass bug line we use here, and no problem whatsoever.
Is it, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and when I used to sell this stuff at the store, but isn't the difference between salt and freshwater the core? I mean, a saltwater core is mono, and typically a freshwater core is dacron. I mean, or isn't that kind of correct or not?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep, and a lot of times it's temperature tolerant.
Right.
But you're fishing there it's not like you're fishing there in the heat of summer, Mexico summer, where it's 100 degrees. It's 70s, 80s every day, which is no different than what we get here in the summer. So those lines aren't gonna, like, a lot of times if it gets too warm, some of those warm or the freshwater lines will get a little gummy and a little sticky, which isn't ideal. So, I mean, it gives everyone a reason to go pick up a new fly line. So, and I've actually found some of the saltwater lines I do really like for freshwater as well. So, but yeah, again, like if you do, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I would say, if you do any sort of smallmouth bass fishing, you pretty much have what you need for the most part already. And it's not like you need like a big, expensive hatch reel. I mean, it's nice to have, but you're not going to use the reel a whole lot. Like you're going to use your hand to bring them in. And so again, it's not, that's the nice thing about it. It's really easy to pack your stuff up and go without having to put in a huge investment in all this different gear that you may never use again. Like all this stuff you can, cross over really, really well.
You're always fishing out of a boat.
Yep. There's no waiting. Nope. You're always fishing on a boat. Oh, I didn't even mention the boats they have are kind of like the ones that they run, are basically like these custom made. They're really, really comfy. They have like, these really, really comfy, like almost like beach chairs in them, 2 of them next to each other. And then they have this like footrest. So you can really get comfy. And there's a few times, bringing a couple of beers on board, and you're like, no, you keep fishing. I want to sit right here and enjoy the sun. But yeah, they're super comfortable boats.
Is the drill one person fishes at a time?
Yep, one person fishes at a time. Yep. And then you can determine how you want to switch off. Some people switch off on fish. Some guys do. Every half an hour you swap out. kind of whatever you and your partner decide on.
Okay.
So,
And how big are your trip groups typically?
6 people total max. Yep.
Yeah.
So usually I myself and 5 other anglers is
That's-
ideal. Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Anybody got questions for Kyle, or we're gonna make him tie some flies for us here?
Well, just one, what kind of money are we talking about?
Oh, that's the other thing that's really attractive. Like I think this last year I did it, let's see, 4 nights, 5 days. Basically everything, your lodging and stuff is included. It'd be 2,100.
Wow.
Yep. And
Wow.
that doesn't include airfare or like, your nightly dinners, but I'll tell you what, if you budget like $25 a night for some of the best dinner, you'll have money when you come home. Like everything is really, really affordable down there. So it's not too hard on the wallet, which is nice.
That's good to
Wyatt, our
know.
youngest guide, he went on it, and I don't think he's got a whole lot of money to throw around. He felt like a king down there because he could, have a bunch of pesos in his pocket and have a good time. So
All righty. Well, why
Yeah.
don't you,
we'll swap this over here.
yeah. There you go.
Let's see. I got that fancy microscope thing. We'll see if we can get it to work here. I'll tie the gurgler first. I'm sure you guys have probably seen this one tied. I have just a certain way I tie it, and it's quick and easy, and I like to use it a lot for bass.
Do you change it up at all from salt to fresh, or is it just your tying style for that? Because everybody kind of has their own little nuance. I tie mine a certain way and
Yeah. I mean,
same as everyone else.
it kind of depends on what mood I'm in.
Okay,
Yeah.
but obviously a saltwater hook.
Yeah, yep. I generally tie them on a saltwater hook. I feel like the little extra weight of the saltwater hook versus like a B10S or something like that. It just seems to make it perform a little bit better, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Yeah. But you can, again, I'll tie it here probably without legs, or I can throw some legs in there if you guys want to see. But the ones when I go tarpon fishing, I hadn't put legs on them, and they work just fine. Sometimes for bass fishing, I do like the legs on it to like imitate more of like a bug of some sort.
what size hook do you prefer for that application?
I like a 1/0, and like most of your flies down there, I know like, the larger tarpon usually call for a little larger of a fly. But everything down there seems like 1/0 is just the perfect hook size.
Do you have a favorite hook?
I don't, just kind of a standard, stainless steel, like
Stinger
Yeah.
style? Stinger style?
no,
Style?
like, I mean, I have tied them on stinger styles before, but these are just your classic looking hook. I'm blanking on the name of the style, Irish name. Dang it, I'm drawing a blank on it here. Let's see if I can. I know like the original Gartside Gurgler is tied on a longer shank hook, and I don't tie it on that. I tie basically what I tie my Murdiches and stuff like that on. Let's see. Hey, look at that. It's even in focus already. You guys see that all right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. Okay. I just have GSP loaded up here. You probably don't need that overkill, but I was tying with some deer hair earlier, and that's what I like to use. So I'm just gonna lay some thread down here.
Big fan of glue, Kyle?
What's that?
You a big fan of glue?
You know, some days I am and some days I'm not.
Okay.
Depends if I can find my glue and if I have any left. But yeah, yeah, generally I'll glue things for sure. It depends on kind of what my time put in on tying the fly is. If it's something that takes me a little longer, I'm definitely going to make sure I'm gluing so it doesn't fall apart on me. But something that's quick and easy like a gurgler, I generally don't do a ton of gluing.
Okay.
I'm just going to grab myself a maybe just shy of a pencil worth of a bucktail here. This is just chartreuse, but again, you can tie these in any color. I generally like to grab the tips and pull out any of the smaller stuff that may get trapped in there. You don't need it in there. And again, you know, you can get super creative with this fly, as you all probably know if you've tied it. What's that? Oh, yeah, so it's you could have a craft fur tail if you wanted. You could have a marabou tail, you know, you can make it out of basically whatever you want. I generally seem to like the stiffer bucktail, mainly because I think it makes it can kind of like act as a rudder a lot of times and kind of dart it side to side once in a while, especially if you get a nice retrieve going. I'm just gonna tie that bucktail in and just wrap forward. I like to leave a little bucktail on there just so I have a little extra something body there. Let's make sure that's wrapped down real nice. Just gonna use a little crystal flash here. And when I was down there this last time, I fished only a day, like I said, but I used the gurgler the entire time and there was hardly anything left of it. I had one that was just, it popped really, really well. And they seemed to really like it. Excuse me, didn't necessarily pop, but it made like a nice spray of water really well. I'm just gonna get about like four strands of crystal flash here. Just bring those in and tie those right. I tie them right on top of the bucktail. I just wrap the crystal flash in the middle right around the thread and just wrap back over it, lock it in place there. And I usually cut it to length, about the length of the bucktail, try not to clip off my bucktail. And then you can get a punch for let's see if you guys can see that. I'll back it up a little bit here. You can get a punch for it. I think it's a little unnecessary. I mean, it makes it look a little nicer, maybe, but let's turn off one of these lights. Might be too dark now. Oh, that's good. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's kind of blowing everything out before. But I basically just cut, I would say, I don't know, around a 1/4 inch thickness and about, you know, I would say err on the side of longer foam than shorter foam. You can always trim it. But I usually taper just one end. Just so it's got a little area to tie in right there. I'm just going to lay that down. Give it a good pinch on the hook. And secure that in, just wrapping forward. I like to pinch it and hold it on top of the hook so it doesn't spin around. And then I'll wrap back over it just to kind of make sure it's really locked in there and kind of fold some of that foam down. And then they're at. And again, the belly, you can use all sorts of different materials. Really, whatever chenille you got laying around. You could do a dubbing loop with something. Here, I'm just going to use some polar chenille. This is just orange polar chenille, which I have here. Just tie that in. I like polar chenille because it's a little longer fibered and makes it look real leggy down there. It comes in a lot of different colors. It doesn't hold a lot of water. So, you know, it keeps the fly relatively lightweight. It doesn't drag it down. And I'm going to wrap all the way up until about leave at least an eye's worth of space up there. And then I'm just going to palmer this forward, sweeping back with each turn. And I tie these in a huge array of colors. I really started to like them a lot for bass. It seems as though as you get later in the summer and maybe the bass have seen a lot of poppers, a lot of things that make noise, this tends to still do the trick because it's a little more subtle. I don't fish it quite as aggressively, where it seems like this is a little quieter, number one, landing on the water. And then also when you strip it, it's kind of sprays water versus pop. And I think that is a big difference when those fish get pressured. It's something not quite as audible, but still makes a surface commotion. And I find not a lot of people fishing for bass that I run into. So it's kind of a fly they don't see too often until I get there, and then they know what it is. And once you get up to your thread, you're just going to tie that off. Put your thread. Okay. And now this is kind of the part where experience plays a little role in it. Some people really like a big aggressive loop there. And I've seen other people that pretty much don't put much in there at all. I generally like somewhere in between. I do like there to be a little bit of a loop like this because I find that this helps make like some bubbles, leaves a little bit of a bubble trail. And I really like that in this fly. And so, you know, you can say I usually fold it back, you know, anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 inch, somewhere in there is probably fine. Then I'm just going to pinch that foam down. Oh, excuse me, I'm going to wrap my thread forward to the eye and then do that. There we go. And I like to do one loose one and then tighten on my second. Bring a third one in there, really make sure that foam's in there good. This is a spot where you could certainly put some glue so things don't spin around the hook. Again, when you're trying to fill your box for the guide season, a lot of times you forego that process just because it slows you down a little bit. It does help with durability. So this is the spot where I would lay some glue down on that thread. I'm just going to forego it right now because I don't know, my glue actually spilled all over one of my hanks of Flashaboo. So, and then this is another thing, again, kind of personal preference here, how big you want this lip. Obviously the bigger the lip, the more commotion it's going to make when you strip it through the water. Some people at this point will just cut it off here. I like to fold it back over. This just gives it a little more strength when it's going against the water, a little more resistance. So we'll go somewhere in there. What I like to do is usually I have just enough, and if you find yourself with not enough excess foam here, you can just cut a piece from your sheet of foam, but I like to just take a small snip off of here. Just like this. Just to make a tab. Whoops, where'd that go? And this tab, I'll show you where that goes here in a second. So I'm gonna fold this down, come in here, make a wrap. Right over where our previous wraps were, if you can. So we have this now, and I like to take that little tab and just set it right here and secure that in there. And if you want to get real artistic, I know this is a Fly Tires Club, so if you want to make things fun, you can make that tab a little different color. And this is where, actually, I think I got some glue right here. We'll need some glue here for this. Okay. So I really like the Loctite super glue gel control for a lot of like my foam application stuff. And I like put a little drop here, a little drop on the back side there. And let that just kind of sit for a moment. Just to set up. Ultimately, push that little tab in there and glue that in there. I find that this is kind of the weak point of the fly, is where this water's pushing against it. So it tends to tear or fail here in this area. And that's why I added this tab in there. So I first started doing it, when you fold the foam over, it doesn't seem like you need it, but it helps with durability a little bit. There you go. Now I usually like to just bring my thread in front here, give a couple wraps just to make sure everything gets locked in there, and then we'll squeeze a little whip finish in there, front of the foam. And actually, a lot of times I know, I think Mark asked me about gluing my flies. I will a lot of times tie, have a tying session, and I'll stick them all in like a foam patch. And then right before I'm done, I'll go in there and flip them all over and just go right through and like dot them all where I whip finished with some head cement. I think that's most efficient for me. Now what I'll do with this polar chenille, you can leave it long and real scraggly, but I kind of like to trim it up just a little bit. And so I'll just kind of come in here at an angle and just aim right towards the point of the hook just to trim it up. And that's kind of my extremely basic version of a gurgler that I like to use. Like I said, I'll add legs, and usually I add the legs right in this process here where I'm tying all this down when it folds back over. That's when you can add your legs in there and have the legs kind of come out this way and back. But again, I have plenty of success with it without legs.
What kind of legs do you use, Kyle?
The ones I have right now are like the flutter legs. I generally like the ones with flat sides versus the round ones.
Okay.
I generally find that they're easier to manipulate. But yeah, honestly, I've tried a bunch of them, and it's hard to say which one I really like. The grizzly flutter legs come in a few of the colors I really like. And so I've just been sticking with those.
Hey, Kyle, what modifications would you make for smallmouth to this fly?
Not much. I'd fish it just like this right here. I'd probably add legs. Would be the
Add legs?
biggest thing. Yep. But
And
I would
size
what's that?
hook?
I would tie it exactly like this, and I often do fish it just like this. You know, I have tied it in a smaller size hook. Let's say like a size 2. And I mean, you could certainly tie it even down to a size 4, I think, for something that looks more like a beetle, or some sort of terrestrial. And I think it would work just well. But generally, this is a good size, and like I said, I'll do it one size probably smaller. And you know, you can make it an array of colors. Maybe I'll make it more in a baitfish color. But I've had a lot of luck with like a chartreuse body, with like a peach belly for some odd reason. Someone had one in the boat, and it just seemed to work really well. So I started tying with like a peach belly with a chartreuse top. Another thing I'll do, because you can make these into a pretty nice looking frog pattern. What I'll do is add, instead of bucktail, I'll put hackle. And I generally like to curve the hackle out. You know, normally you'd kind of curve it in. I take the curve of the feathers and face them out away from the fly, so that they kind of look like legs being splayed out. And that's another kind of modification you can make. And you can add, you can add some marker to the top, make it look a little more froggy. And then again, add some legs, froggy looking legs in there. I think that's pretty effective. And I tie a few of those in as well for bass. But yeah, I mean, this is, again, it's a super simple one. I was a little short on time tying when we went to do some tarpon fishing, and I was like, oh, I forgot to tie some gurglers, and I just quick whipped a few up one night. I think like a half dozen, and they worked real well. So the one thing you do want to avoid that I notice is that if your foam gets too thick, and this whole foamy thing, and this gap right here gets too big, it tends to like want to catch some wind when you're casting it, and it'll struggle to turn over a little bit. So just kind of be mindful as to how much foam and how wide your body is, and how big this gap right here is. And when I'm on the water too, you can manipulate this thing a little bit. Like if it's catching a lot of wind, I'll take it and I'll really pinch this down to kind of help keep it a lower profile. But if I want it to make some more bubbles and stuff, you can kind of push on and open it up a little bit like that, and it'll catch some more air. So yeah, kind of a fun one. So if you don't have it in your box, your warm water box, I'd highly recommend putting it in there. It's a good one to have, and fishes well in a lot of situations. So, but I could fire up another one if you guys want, kind of a streamer. All right, let me just grab some of the materials right here. So I'm just using a Airx 280 minnow hook, 1/0. I really like this hook. It's kind of similar to like a Gamakatsu SL12 or the SL15 maybe. Kind of a shorter shank hook, nice wide gap. But yeah, it's a really nice hook in my opinion for tying baitfish patterns. Because most of the time those fish, when you're fishing those baitfish patterns, they're coming at it from the front. They're hitting it in the, with the head first. So you don't need something super long in my opinion. Where are those eyes? So one of the odd things I found when I started tying all these tarpon flies was that I don't know if you guys can, probably not. Let me see if I've got a piece of paper here. Everyone seems to use these mono eyes for them. You just cut them off. You can see it's like a dumbbell, and you just cut them off and tie those in. The first time I went down there, I thought that was just black bead chain, and then realized that it's mono or plastic eyes. So I think again it has something to do with that fly doesn't fall too quickly. I will add that I did use the bead chain ones with plenty of success. So I don't think it matters a ton, but if the fish are feeling real picky, I think maybe it might make a little difference. So if you have bead chain or dumbbells or whatever, you can use that too. I'm just going to use what the kind of the original pattern kind of calls for. And this pattern is kind of based off, I don't know if it's called, like I said, the Fishalicious or the, what the heck's the other one called? The Megalopsical, kind of the two weird names. But they both look almost identical. And the idea is that they kind of have a deer hair head and a tail and a collar. So I'm just going to add my thread here. Started right at the eye. I'll work back a little bit. And then I'm just going to put these eyes in here. One second here. And actually, you know, I have seen them where they tie them in back here, but I'm just going to share what I've learned from it. I don't think it makes a difference if you tie them right up next to the hook or the hook eye. I find it when we add the deer hair, I find it a lot easier to kind of maneuver around them when it's tied right up at the eye here. So I'm just gonna do that quick. But yeah, just make sure they're in there nice. And then we're just going to bring our thread back to about the point of the hook or so, just a little past that. And then I've got some EP fiber here. You can use EP fiber. You can use like the SF. I forget what the heck they call that. It's similar to an EP fiber. Any sort of like a little stiffer material that's going to hold its own a little bit, and not something that's super kind of flimsy. You want something that will, you know, you could probably even get away with bucktail here just fine. But the EP fiber I tend to like a lot, and it's kind of neat. If you go down to Campeche, there's a good chance you'll probably meet Enrico Puglisi. He's got a place down there, and he's good family friends with the family, and so I just thought it was right to be tying. You know, if he somehow showed up at the dock and wanted to see my box, I wanted to make sure I had some of his fibers in there, so he didn't kick me off. So, but I don't. If you guys haven't worked with this stuff, I would say it comes with a little bit of a learning curve as far as how much to use. I find a little kind of goes a long ways here. And what I like to, you know, this is, I don't even know, like almost like a half a pencil, probably. You pull it tight, and I'm just going to pull that out. And what I'm going to do here is this, I'm going to use the whole thing, but I'm gonna put it around the thread just like I'm tying in flash. And tie that down and then kind of just tie back over it. Just like that. You want to, if it's starting to go down the bend of the hook, I would say advance your thread forward a little bit just so it doesn't do that. But I find that kind of putting it in the middle there is just an easy way to work with it without having to cut it up and maneuver it around. Just a quick and easy way to do that. And then, real simple here, we're going to wrap forward just past the point of the hook, or right at the point of the hook, we can say, for the ease of instruction here. Then I just have some black marabou here. And the key with this fly is that you don't want it to get too bulky. So you kind of, again, a little goes a long ways on some of this. And you want to find some marabou that's doesn't have like a real strong like quill in it, something that's kind of relatively wispy. I lost my white piece of paper. Should have changed my shirt. Something along that looks like this here. We're looking for like 2 to 4 of those, depending on how nicely that feather is. This one's got some weird stuff going on. What all this is going to do is just kind of cover up that transition. So I'm going to flip my fly over and just bring that in. You're going to tie in kind of just, I want to say just the tip of the marabou. Feathers. I'm gonna find the right feather here. There we go. That's a better one. All right. It's kind of hard to see that, isn't it? Shed some light on the situation. We'll give that 2-3 wraps in there, cut that one off, and then we're going to flip back over and do the same thing on the top. So we kind of have just basically marabou covering up that transition of where we tied in that EP fiber. That's the goal here. I've used Arctic Fox for this. I've used, like a wrap of rabbit, like cross-cut rabbit. That would work as well. And the same thing, kind of matching the length of the one on the bottom. Some good securing wraps in there. So basically you have a collar of marabou is what we're looking to do. I know it's kind of hard to see on this thing here. And then we're just going to kind of clean up that marabou a little bit on the hook. We're going to come in here. I just have some, this is just chartreuse. You can use whatever color hair, spinning hair you'd like for this. I just like this color combo: chartreuse head, black collar, and then a tail. And I usually will draw some black lines on the tail just to kind of keep with the theme of somewhat of a stripe look to it. You want to start off with a pretty darn good pinch of the spinning hair. Kind of as much as you feel comfortable working with. So there we go. That's about what I got there. Almost 2 pencils worth. Gonna cut that off the hide. Grab the tips, just pull out any under fur. Usually if you got some good spinning hair, there shouldn't be a whole lot in there. But quality has been a little hard to find lately. Once you get that, you're just going to transition hands, trying to keep the tips somewhat aligned. They don't have to be perfectly aligned. I wouldn't say you need to like stack them or anything like that. But we got our tips here. And we're just going to lay that down on top of the hook. So the tips go back about halfway into the marabou. And we're just going to switch hands again, pinching that deer hair there. And we don't want this one to spin. We want to try to keep this right nice and on top, this first pinch of hair. The next ones we add in there will allow to spin around the hook. But this first one I like to keep so that we get a nice little like deer hair collar on the top. If it does spin, it's not the end of the world. I'm sure it'll still fish and the tarpon will still eat it. But for this one, if you can, just keep everything nice and tight, keep pinch tight. And make a wrap, pulling down, locking that deer hair in nicely. I usually like to do 3-4 wraps, real nice tight ones to make sure I got that in there. This is where a little, like some GSP or some stronger thread is nice to have. You can really torque on it without cutting through it, ideally. Okay. So when you flip it over, you should have a pretty empty void on the bottom there. Well, it's kind of hard with the camera angle, but you got a place right there to put another tuft of hair. We'll do about the same amount. And this isn't one of those, deer hair bugs where it needs to look super nice. Like all you're doing is trying to get a head that's going to be a little bit buoyant, and kind of give the fly a little bit of a wobble action when it goes through the water here. So if you're not real experienced or don't like playing with deer hair too much, don't think you need to be of an artistry level to do this one. It's pretty straightforward. Lay this one on there, and this one I'll allow to spin if it wants to. So I'll go around once and make a second one. And the second one I'll pull down along that hair to kind of work its way around. And I'll help it around to make sure that it kind of fills everything in nicely. There's a little bit of an art to this. The head on these is, that's why I kind of like to tie a number of these ones. Sometimes if you pack the deer hair too tight, it ends up being almost too buoyant and it won't go below the surface. So the idea here is it's not made to float. It's just made to kind of add almost like a suspension to the fly so that it kind of hangs really nicely in the water. So you can work your thread forward, pulling back that deer hair. We're trying to work up to the eye of the hook here. Kind of tuck everything back so that our thread is in front of all that deer hair. And then move in front of the eyes here where we can half hitch or whip finish or however you like to finish your fly. If you're like me, you can never find your whip finish tool. Sometimes when you're working with deer hair, it is easier just to do it with your fingers. But if you carefully do it, it should be all right. Once you get it whip finished off, you can cut your thread. Now we're just gonna give this guy a little trim. Let me show you. I'll show you another fly real quick just to see what you're looking for. So we're kind of looking for a relatively flat profile, tapering out from the eyes outward to the collar. And I generally like to cut it real flat on the bottom.
Almost like a D&D head, huh?
Yeah, similar to that. Yeah, you're not necessarily looking for it to be a diver head. So, but generally like kind of flat on the bottom and top, and then angling out from the sides, if that makes some sense. It's funny when you look at these flies and the different guides that tie them, they all kind of cut the head a little different. Some cut it super flat and narrow on the top and bottom, and then like really angle it out towards the sides. And other ones kind of have like a more round, a little more round shape to the head. Again, I think the key here is that there's just some buoyancy in that deer hair, and that's what that kind of gives it some fun action. I try to avoid to really cut the deer hair tips on the top. Try not to cut those off if I can help it.
How long do you leave that tail, Kyle? Like that tail?
Yeah, I'll get to that here in just a second.
Okay.
I tend to like my flies probably like in the 4 or 5 inch range. If that helps. And what you're gonna do is, I kind of like to see if I can adjust the camera here, move my vise, probably is easier. Yeah, and so I kind of like to pull on it. And I like to cut from both an angle from the top and the bottom on these. So it kind of comes to a point. But you can always start with longer, is usually what I do. And then, come in and make it shorter if you need to. Let's see if I can find my marker here. So, I wish I could zoom that out a little bit more, but. If that helps. Yeah, it's nice to have a good taper on that tail if you can. Like I find myself kind of like looking at it, manipulating it. I always carry a scissors in my boat if I can. Obviously, if you're checking a bag, you can put a scissors in there. But even in my my smallmouth boat bag. I always keep a scissors to like I can make adjustments to flies. I always think that flies, you shouldn't be afraid to make changes to your flies when something needs to be changed. It's not black. It's easy to think they're going to look really nice on a vise, but once you get them in the water, you may find that they need a little bit of adjustment. And I like to just come in here with a marker and just kind of give a couple little lines. Probably more for me than anything. But it tends to be a popular thing in saltwater to give things lines. A lot of the fish have got that stuff going on. I'll switch it back to my other camera, and I think it'll be easier to see this fly because it's a little larger.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's probably easier to see.
They cast pretty well.
Yeah, they cast really well.
Doesn't give you a big shower with your back cast, shedding water.
No, because there's not a ton of that in there.
Okay.
But yeah, that's kind of the thing that the EP fibers are known for, right? Is like, holding some water and spraying everything when it comes out of the water.
You don't get a lot of wrap around the hook cape.
No, this stuff's really great that way. I think it's just stiff enough that it doesn't foul. And that's kind of why I stuck with this. I will also show you, if you guys got time, one really neat little trick I learned for making like a tail, have you guys ever seen when you're tying a rabbit tail, instead of making the loop underneath the tail, you can actually go through the rabbit leather?
I've seen that done on certain applications, but I know what you're talking about the monofilament loop.
Yeah, I'll show you on another fly here that I have. Yeah, this is something I just learned from watching some tarpon guys tie. So instead of making your let's see here. So there's this way of doing it where you tie a little loop of mono off the back of your hook.
Right.
Like that.
Yep.
But this way I found is far, far more effective. Is that you actually puncture a hole through the rabbit and run that mono through the rabbit strip.
Oh, and make a loop and then that holds it straight out.
It
there.
holds it straight. It works like flawlessly.
Right, right.
Yeah, that was kind of a super neat trick I picked up when I was kind of working on tying some different patterns here.
That's
Because this is like a tarpon toad. It's made with EP fiber. It's a little more time consuming fly. I think the deer hair ones work just as fine. So yeah, that's a kind of a neat little trick. If you're tying, tying things with a rabbit tail, that's a really good way to prevent it from fouling. And ever since I did that, I didn't have one rabbit tail foul, which if you've ever fished with those, you know how
yeah, they can be terrible.
yeah, real bad. So
That's a great idea. So question on this thing, if you don't tie a bunch of flies, are flies provided when you're fishing down there?
Yeah, they say they do. Most of the time though, you don't need a ton of flies, and you can pick up like a tarpon kit through like a fly shop, and they'll have like the basics that you're gonna need. Yeah, but I found most of the time, once you kind of get out of the United States, like flies being provided is tough, just because there's like, they don't have a fly shop down there. So they have nowhere to get flies. And a lot of times a great gift, like, in addition to, a tip for your guide would be to leave them some flies. That kind of stuff goes a really long ways. your tippets, all that kind of stuff. Anytime you get out away from the US, like that stuff isn't easy to come by. And leaving it there for the guides is always, they generally really appreciate that. So.
Oh, a bugger barn full of flies and you walk out of there being like the man of the doubt.
Yeah, they're going to remember you for sure. No doubt.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Does
So.
anybody have questions for Kyle before we cut him loose here tonight? Guys, everybody got lockjaw tonight?
Yeah. They're all thinking of warmer weather now.
Yeah, I don't know.
Everyone's.
Not me.
But I will tell you guys, this is just a little secret and I'm probably shooting myself in the foot too, but you alluded to it earlier. When I came down or came up last summer in August, when I was fishing with you and also when I was fishing with Ben, I basically used a Murdich and a Gurgler. That was it.
Yeah.
He killed it. And I have that same Murdich and it's and the Gurgler and it's pretty gnarly looking right now,
Yeah.
it's foamed out and so if you guys plan on fishing with him in popper weather or something like that, bring a few with you because they do a good job. They
Yeah,
do.
for sure. Yeah, and I think this pattern too, I was playing around with it. It swims really nicely. I think you could tie it in just like a baitfish pattern or baitfish color white.
Will
over
that
it,
hold up? I mean, will that thing survive like 10, 15 fish?
Yeah. I mean, tie a couple extra, but yeah, for the most part, you just kind of twist, you can twist the eyes back into shape and that kind of thing. But yeah, they do a good job.
Good deal.
So.
Well, guys, I can't speak highly enough about this young man. I fished with him many times and when he first started and now that he is emerging into the dream that he saw way back when, do yourself a favor, spend a day in a boat with this guy, one of my favorite things to do in the whole world. And I'm looking forward to fishing with you in a couple of months here soon. So.
Yeah. Likewise.
Anybody got any more questions for him? Otherwise, we can cut him loose. No? Kyle, pleasure always, my friend.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Good deal. Give him
Was
a
that-
call. He's a good dude.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.
Great.
See you, man.
Have a good one.
All right, good night.
All right.